So yes, topic we are going to be discussing, considering for the next half an hour or so is burn. Oh, hang on, I've got to do the multitasking like people in as well. Right, no. And we've been hearing about burnout a lot more in recent years. And it actually became classified by the World Health Organization in 2019. But we need to recognize its classification, although it's in the International Classification of Diseases, it is considered an occupational phenomenon rather than a medical condition. So it's the definition, as you've got here, syndrome conceptualizes resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So whilst to say it's not a medical condition as such, we still in the workplace need to be wary of it from a risk management perspective, because I was having a dig around to see any case law and things in relation to the Equality Act, and it is still considered, it would still be covered by the Equality Act, because the impact of it would have the effect of physical or mental impairment that has the substantial and long-term negative effects on ability to do everyday activities, which we know is the test. There was a case in May this year that actually was in relation to burnout, and it was a successful claim. So we do need to be aware of it from that perspective, as well as the whole, doing the right thing and the culture and all the things that we want to be doing as organisations to be preventing it in the first place. So when we are looking at the different dimensions of burnout, these are the key things that indicate burnout as the cause: a feeling of energy depletion or exhaustion, that sense of increased mental distance from somebody's job, or negativism or cynicism related to one's job, and actually reduced efficiency, so people not actually able to do their jobs well. And it is very specifically a term related to work. So it's not something about everyday life. People don't get, in terms of the definition, the classification, you don't get burnt out from your personal life. You get burnt out from the definition in relation to a work experience. So recognising that. So as I usually do, I had a bit of a dig around to see what statistics and what information is out there, what we know about it. And these were some fairly recent things that where burnout has been mentioned. And we can see gender differences. 74% of men against 61% of men said they were very stressed or somewhat stressed for work-related reasons. We've got mothers in paid employment more likely to experience burnout than fathers. What I did notice actually that there is a bit of confusion in the general media about really what burnout is. A lot of it was talking about it in more overall life rather than specifically as the occupational phenomenon. But we do know, so from some academic studies, that women are more vulnerable to burnout than men. That was research by University of Montreal a few years ago. When people are asked subjectively, by indeed more than half were saying they were feeling burnt out. But I think as we look through it a bit more, it's actually challenging, people's perspective of how they're feeling, which is still totally valid, against whether it would be actually defined as that. These other statistics, no surprise at all in terms of everything else we know about impact on psychological well-being of the last year or so. So, there's a lot of stuff talking about burnout when you start looking around and digging in. So let's consider this element to start with. Stress or burnout? How would you describe the difference from your understanding? Anybody want to throw in their thoughts, difference between stress and burnout?
I'm going to throw in my thoughts, because actually I had this myself a little while ago, which is one of the reasons why I thought it was quite important for me to join. And I wouldn't have said it was stress. It was just a build up of just continuously being on that rat race. It wasn't really work related. It wasn't personal. And I would say, yeah, burnout, it was just it was a thought process. It was just all become a bit overwhelming and just needed to, I think like a lot of people haven't been taking holidays, and most people take their holidays to go on holiday. So if you're not taking it, you're not physically taking that time out. And it was just a build up.
Yeah, I think well, obviously you've got the experience of it. So absolutely, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that your description of how it happens is extremely accurate with all the other stories that I've seen about it. And actually, burnout is, if you like, the outcome of that continual excessive stress. And whilst and it's generally a gradual process. It doesn't happen overnight, but quite often when you hear of people's experience, it builds up overnight, but people might not recognize it, and then suddenly it hits. And when that burnout hits, then there's no arguing that it's arrived. And the best way that I can think of to differentiate it is when we're feeling highly stressed, it's like everything's hyper vigilant, hyper fast, lots of everything. We could all feel ourselves in that stress set. It's an excess of. Whereas burnout goes to the absolute opposite. It's when we are in a state of total depletion of everything. And it's not about running on empty, it's about being empty and not even being able to function. And that is the fundamental difference, just to say. Yeah, stress can be positive and copable. Yeah, absolutely. We all know that stress is a continuum. We need a certain amount of stress, and some stress is actually positive. You think the excitement, the anticipation for things, it can drive performance. We know excessive stress is not. But yeah, burnout is that. I say it's not running on empty. It's about being empty and actually not having the resources to draw on. Jo, anything else you want to? You've got some knowledge of it. It's always useful to get that from other people. Anything else you want to add?
I did. I actually worked for a very large conglomerate and suffered a burnout a year ago. And I would agree with you that stress is totally different to stress. And actually, my release was leaving work and going off and doing things. But like everyone else, I was working from home and isolated at home. So that might have had a contributory factor towards it. But I think it was the whole a burnout is your inability to function on any level. It's almost like a nervous breakdown, but the burnout causes the nervous breakdown so that you cannot function on any level, and you know, even actually not having the ability to make a diary appointment, you know, something as mundane as that turns into a big deal on a burnout. So it's not a pleasant experience, and it's one that I would advise everyone to avoid like the plague, you know, and to look for signs of in their workforce, because it's like you say, it's all too easy to reach that point and not realize you're getting there or even getting close.
Thank you. Yeah, there was somebody that was going to come and join the conversation today to share her experience, but we've got two people here that have already been able to do that. And I think, I thought it was quite interesting in that Indeed survey, when people were subjectively asked what, you know, if they were thinking they were burnt out, but actually they were, well, I can't make a judgment, but I'd be surprised if that many people were. But it's about, you know, that sense of being tired, being, you know, overstretched is stress. It's not burnout. Burnout, as both experiences have said today, is when actually you can't function. Yeah, it's process, energy keeps depleting, and so thank you. You've given me this perfect segue into the next slide that I've got. So let me just put that one up. As where the difference, how that manifests itself. I'll just let you look at that. So I think that the best way that I can think of is the difference between stress is when everything is overfull, burnout is where everything is empty. but actually we get to burnout generally because of a period, what we do, that's how it's diagnosed, from that period of excessive ongoing stress. When we do stress management courses or talk about, the stress container, when it can overflow, you could argue that actually at some point that's when we hit burnout. So let's think about the signs of the different signs and symptoms of burnout. So emotional signs, behavioural signs, physical signs. And I'm going to, someone else is going to join us. Where are we? Let's just do that in the room, and then we'll go back in. We'll go into rooms to chat a bit further on. What would you think are emotional signs of burnout, given what we know so far?
Could it be where someone is usually quite engaged and emotional about what they do, suddenly having zero emotion? That you talked about, that detachment piece. Some people, where some people might get emotional who are burnt out, some people might not have the energy to even be emotional and are almost not robotic. Like, I don't mean to play it down, but they can become quite mechanical about what they're doing, just turning up and trying to function, but don't.
Yeah, I think that's great. Lots of great examples in that one. Yes, the loss of motivation, negative outlook, lack of satisfaction in the work. All of those. And I think if you use the metaphor of a drained battery, actually thinking about how much you get out of a drained flat battery actually doesn't do much, and that's what happens when we've got the burnout bit. So the emotional signs, behavioural signs, what sort of thing? There's a bit of an overlap, but what would be behavioural signs you might notice in somebody?
Would you say mood swings, sort of, quite manic or quite sedated behaviour, so one extreme to the other? Not making rational decisions, whereas they would have done before, and making mistakes. Sometimes silly mistakes, but sometimes quite serious mistakes. I actually heard of a case not long ago where somebody was on a burnout and was actually worked for was it Intel or one of these big American computer companies, and got sacked. Didn't get diagnosed, and they sacked him because he made a mistake, and he was suffering burnout, and then went on to get early onset dementia as well, which was totally unrelated. Well, we don't know if it was related, but he made a big mistake. He made a couple of mistakes, and instead of the company trying to find the reason for the mistakes after a 30-year career with them, they dismissed him. So mistakes.
I think that's about withdrawing from responsibility, isolating self. Skipping work, all the things, potentially taking out frustrations of others. And with a lot of it's perhaps some of the other helpful coping strategies that people might be adopting, the usual alcohol, drugs, food, working silly hours, those sorts of things can all be the burnout signs. Remembering why this is particularly, if you're coming here from the HR perspective, recognizing that burnout is a gradual process and it creeps up on people. And so actually when things creep up on you, you often don't notice yourself. I think both examples that people have shared today was that, so within an organization, we have to be alert to how people are behaving, any signs, symptoms they are giving out that may be an indication that that's what's happening to them, because they may not pick it up themselves. So they may not recognize stress, but actually they may not recognize that actually it's getting to a point where it's not manageable.
Yeah, Marion, I actually wasn't aware that and it was a gradual thing. And I say it wasn't anything specific. It wasn't until I took actually, I think I had 2 or 3 days off as annual leave from work. And it wasn't actually until I took those days off that I realized I literally just crashed. and thought, hang on a minute,
Yeah.
I should be excited about this, but I had nothing in me.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
I sort of realised and thought, okay, I just took some time out.
The person that was going to join us today, I remember talking to her, and she was actually almost bewildered, as in she just never known anything like it, couldn't understand it, you know, it always worked, and actually there was not an option. You know, it hit and that was it, and it was months, you know, and it is you know, depending on the severity, it can be a very, very difficult thing to come back. I mean, obviously people do, but actually if your resources are so depleted, actually finding those resources to start building your resources can be a very difficult thing to do. And if we don't ever know from you know, positive psychology area and broaden and build theories, we need to have some positive emotions to help build our resources that, you know, but if we've got nothing at the beginning, it can be quite difficult to do. What about physical signs? What physical signs and symptoms might somebody be experiencing? Yeah, so Joe's saying taken a year, yeah. Physical signs.
I guess people could get quite tearful with it as well.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, like, I guess that comes under emotional, but
yeah, I think quite often, I don't know what the other experience, that the tearfulness is sort of in the final stages of build up. Almost once it's hit, there's actually very little emotion there, which is quite yeah, which is difficult in itself. There's sort of a numbing element to it as well. So think of, yeah, a few things that you can put on your internal checklist of what you might be looking out for with other people. Dependency, Joe, you've written in that. You expand on that a little bit more. What you were.
I think if it's you know, you notice people might have more dependency on physical things like you say, drugs, alcohol, food.
Oh, okay, right, yeah.
Yeah. Or it might be a physical dependency on a colleague, you know, offloading to a colleague, or you know, just having being generally more needy and less resilient, less standalone, less independent, you know, less confident, low self-esteem. All those things come into play, because when you reach that point of burnout, it's you don't see any value in anything, least of all yourself.
Yeah.
You know, because nothing means anything anymore.
Yeah, thank you. So what I'd like us to think about next is what factors might increase the risk of burnout. So if we are to think about all the things we know from our experience of work, HR perspective, what are the things that might be increasing that risk? And I'm going to put you into a couple of groups. I'm going to hope that people who haven't got cameras on I feel able to participate once we get into the room. Obviously it makes life a lot easier for conversations. I'll drop into both to check that that's okay. So have a few minutes thinking about those factors, what it might be the risk factors in a work situation that might be contributing or might be increasing risk. Let me put you into a couple of groups. Right, how are we doing? Right, we're just going to do 5 minutes on that, because obviously the next bit we went to think about is what can we do about it, and we want to spend more time on that. Okay, hopefully that gave you a bit of time to talk, even if not very long. So the first group, the group that Joe, Maria, Paula, Sharon, anybody like to share the gist of your conversation?
Do you want me to do it, Sharon, or do you want to do it?
I think Sharon is. She just hasn't unmuted. So if you unmute, start again.
Mute. I'll mute me.
There we go. Off you go, Sharon. Oh, I'm still not hearing you. Is everybody else?
no. Can you hear me now?
That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, so we were talking about some of the factors around like work specifically, like long hours and, you know, fear of job security in the climate that we're in, but also home factors and other factors that could be causing stresses like, you know, having to work from home and feeling isolated perhaps, or not having the right setup. For example, where I work, we have quite a lot of students and trainee scientists, and they're not in stable accommodation. So maybe in Airbnbs or, you know, moving place to place, and that can cause another layer of stress. I think, Jo, you've got a few more things written down, haven't you?
Yeah, I put like the culture within the organization. So, you know, some companies, it's the norm within those companies to have bad behavior, like passive aggressive behavior, and that's bordering on bullying. And the culture is that you get a badge of honor if you work 70 hours a week, you know, and it's about, as an HR and ER people, that we discourage that, and we actively encourage a healthy balance for our employees and for our colleagues, so that they don't work 70+ hours a week, because it's not right. It's not healthy.
Not on any level.
The productivity, you know. So, but it's sometimes getting the senior management teams to buy into that, because they do it. They think everyone else should have to do it as well.
Yeah, and they're the ones that should be role modeling the right behaviours.
Exactly. It's led by example, and quite often it's not, you know. I mean, it's getting less and less, I think, but I still think you've still got small school people out there who see it as, you know, if you, especially in some sectors like investment banking, which is where my son works, that if it is a badge of honor, if you're not in the office at 5 a.m. and leaving at midnight, then you're doing something wrong, you know. So yeah, so that was what we discussed.
Thank you very much. What about the other groups? Ingrid, Sarah, Nikki, your group, anything else come up in your discussion?
We actually were talking about culture as well, and that it's led from top up, and about that openness to speak about mental health, or that constant, you know, on the go and demand and having to do things. And it, yeah, definitely about leading top down, an environment that people are at, being at home, being isolated. So we actually spoke very similar to the first group.
Thank you. I think Sharon's points, you know, around stresses, I think is valid. Whilst it's, you know, burnout is very much a work-related thing, we don't and we can't exist in work in isolation. So, you know, if our resources are depleted because of other stresses, then, you know, it's not going to help. But a high stress job doesn't by default lead to burnout. You know, people can manage stress very well. Others find it's more difficult, and there's some particular personality traits that are apparently more prone to it. People that are, you know, describe themselves as perfectionists because, you know, whatever they do is not good enough, or if they have, you know, very negative self-belief, or, you know, either the high achieving ones or the need to be in total control can increase risk. But yeah, I think so much is about the things that we talk about in relation to, I think, all aspects of our well-being at work, our performance at work. Ultimately, the checklist is the same, isn't it? It's about culture, it's about leadership style, it's about communication, it's about level of autonomy on our roles, it's about the workload, it's about equality of treatment. These are all things that can create risk factors. But actually, then that also gives us opportunities. So what I want to actually, what I did find, yeah. So Gallup, they find when they did a survey, the 5 main causes they found as risk were unreasonable time pressure. So people who have don't have time to do their work, but also, and interestingly, it was particularly prevalent in roles where people didn't have creating more time as an option. So sort of paramedics or firefighters, you know, when they came to a situation, you know, working longer hours wasn't an option to cope with it. So, you know, that increased their vulnerability to potential burnout after a lot of time of working in that sort of situation. the communication and support for managers. I mean, I think the list I've got here, I could have written without needing to do the research, because it's the thing that we see on, you know, most things around engagement, mental health, lack of role clarity, a manageable. So it's all those things. So what we need to think about now is, given this awareness, given that we know people may not recognise it in themselves until it hits, and once it's hit, it's there, and it's much difficult and much harder for people to pull themselves back from it. And we, as ourselves, don't have infinite resources. So given the challenges that you've got in your organisation, if we think about the risk factors, you'll know what happens in your organisation, the limit on our own resources and, you know, organisational resources. How is your time and energy and expertise best spent to address this issue? And I'm going to put you back into your group to give you a bit of time to think about that. So, you know, we know about the symptoms, we know what it can contribute to it. We know the things that we've got going in our organisations, but with the greater awareness of burnout, where would we particularly focus our time and energy to help prevent burnout becoming more of an issue in your organisation? So give you a little bit longer, but it's not going to be a huge amount longer. I'll give you 8 minutes this time. I'll keep you in the same group so you can carry on your conversations. But, you know, share ideas, see what some people are doing in organisations, think about obstacles some of you might have, and then how you can share ideas of new ways. And, you know, a lot of it will also be drawing on wellbeing things that you're hopefully doing. Right. Just looking at time, so we'll try and share quickly some thoughts. What are you going to put on your to-do list as an outcome of attending today? So let's go for the other way round. So group 1, I think, oh no, group 2. So that's, yeah, Ingrid, Nikki, Sarah, Gillian. What were you talking about?
I don't know if we appointed anybody, so I'll just jump in. It was really interesting to hear some of the thoughts. Nikki talked about a wellbeing agenda, and Sarah was talking about the transition. People had gone from in-person to being remote, and maybe a journey back, or whether they stay as they are. But what was interesting for me is where I am is fully remote. We're like, my team are in New York and Washington and things.
Oh,
so
wow, right.
A lot of the solutions, you know, a team walk, for example, was a brilliant one, but I'm thinking we would all need to be walking sort of virtually in our own areas. But it's just, for me, it's about having to think really creatively and, you know, sort of still connecting with a group like this to try and think about what works really well. I think where you can, and you're all in the one geography, there's so much more opportunity now to have that in-person interaction. That came across strongly when we were all speaking anyway, but it just remains a bit of a challenge for me.
Yes, we have to be much more creative in that team building and engagement piece when we've got that mix. Yeah, thank you. What about the other group? Where did your discussion take you?
I think we were looking at more how to remove we came back to culture quite a lot. We felt that the impact of the pandemic has sped up our need to look at this more closely and to react to it, and to put measures in place now that maybe we wouldn't have done if the pandemic hadn't happened. And we were looking at Sharon was saying around educating our line managers about the language we use, and about, you know, we've put mental health first aiders in place, upskilling the managers. And Sharon was saying around stress risk assessments as part of the one-to-one process, so that we can identify people who might be at higher risk than others, and put measures in place to support them more actively so that they don't go off work with burnout.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else anybody else wants to throw in, just as on reflection, or any other ideas? My perspective would be, actually reducing burnout would be an outcome of all the things that I would expect to be on the HR agenda anyway. When we are looking at wellbeing strategies, which fortunately at last is having a greater emphasis in organisations. Organisations are recognising there's a business case around it. We've talked about mental health a lot more in the last couple of years. You know, we've always been talking about leadership style, cultures. All these are things that we've been wanting to organisations to focus and understand. So I think if we get progress in those areas, outcomes would involve lower stress levels, and further outcomes less likely of having risk at burnout. But I mean, some of the more, actual interventions would be stress management techniques, clear wellbeing interventions, raising awareness of the signs and symptoms. I do this a lot with mental health first aid training, mental health awareness training. Actually, a lot of the education is about people having the awareness themselves of symptoms and signs, because often people don't notice it within themselves, never mind colleagues. Or sometimes we might notice it in colleagues and don't see it in ourselves, but actually that whole awareness piece. So lots of different areas I think there are for us to think about. Let's say, but when I was reflecting more, ultimately I was thinking actually reducing burnout is an outcome of all the other things that we are probably doing within organisations anyway. Which I don't know whether that makes it easier or harder from your perspective, but there's probably quite a lot on your list of things to do. But it's recognising that we can, link things, and often with the wellbeing strategy and leadership style, to me it's a matrix of things, isn't it? We're not dealing with one thing that is only about leadership style, because leadership style impacts wellbeing. If you're feeling empowered, you've got autonomy on your role, and you're communicated in a respectful way, that has an impact on your psychological well-being. So that they're all really interlinked. But I'm just mindful of time, so we better wrap up. So hopefully that has taken you, given you, it says participants can see my screen, but it's not showing my slide. All right, I'll just go the last one, which just tells you why. So it's been really good to have the conversation with you today, and thank you particularly those of you that have shared your experience, because I always think that is one of the most powerful ways for people to learn, actually understanding people's lived experience. If Joe mentioned mental health first aiders, if it's something you are looking at, we'll put a link afterwards, but I've got an open course starting it in a couple of weeks, 8th of November, as there's places on that. If it's something you are looking at for your organisation, it'd be great to have a conversation around that. So I think that brings us to a close. Amy, do you want to do your wrap up and remind people what we've got next?
Yeah, of course. Before I do that, I just wanted to add one more thing as well on what you were just saying, the point from a recruiter's point of view. I think benefits as well are quite important, because a lot of companies are obviously introducing the employee assistance program, and it counts for a lot when those sorts of benefits are in place. That it's one of the things that candidates are looking for now. So just from a recruiter's point of view. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you, Marion. It's been a great session. Thank you for everyone again for sharing your personal experiences. And our next session, we've got a webinar coming up with Warner and Goodman on the 2nd of November, which is around diversity and inclusion. So yeah, that's on the 2nd of November. So I hope to see you all there.